The wind howled across the empty valley, carrying whispers of dust and sorrow. In the distance, a lone horse stood against the dying light, a wild stallion, his coat a storm of gray and silver, eyes dark as thunderclouds. He had known nothing but fear. The sound of footsteps meant danger. The scent of humans meant pain. Yet this evening, something was different. A woman knelt on a ridge, her hands trembling but open. No ropes, no traps, just a quiet presence. Her name was Alara, a rescuer who had seen more broken creatures than she could count. But this wild soul, was different. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He simply stood there, breathing hard, caught between instinct and something deeper, a faint, flickering hope. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a long time, there was only silence, the kind that stretches, fragile and dangerous. The stallion's ears flicked forward. His muscles quivered, ready to bolt. But still, he didn't. Something in her tone, something raw and real, held him there. 3 months earlier, this same stallion had been part of a herd near the old mining plains. Locals called him Ghost, because no one could ever catch him. He was fast in the wind that raced across those dry hills. But one night, a storm rolled in and the earth turned to chaos. Lightning split the sky, scattering the herd. Ghost was driven into a ravine, trapped by flash floods and falling rock. By dawn, the herd was gone, and Ghost, mud-caked, shivering, and bleeding from a gash across his flank, was alone. That's how Alara found him. She was out with her small rescue team, following reports of stranded animals after the storm. When she saw him wedged between boulders, her heart cracked. He wasn't just trapped. He was terrified beyond reason. His breaths came in short bursts, his hooves scraping at the rock as if he could dig his way out. "We have to help him," she said, pushing through the rain. Her partner, Jonas, shook his head. "He's wild. If we go near him, he could kill us both." But Alara wasn't the kind of person who walked away. She had rescued starving dogs from garbage pits, broken horses from racing farms, and once even climbed a cliff to reach an injured eagle. Fear was just another emotion she had learned to move through. "Then we move slow," she said. "Let him see we're not here to hurt him." The rain poured harder, turning the earth to a slick mess. Every movement had to be deliberate. Jonas circled around, trying to find a safe angle. Alara kept low, her hands visible, voice calm. "Easy, boy, easy." Ghost snorted, jerking back. His nostrils flared, eyes wild. He struck at the mud, sending a spray of earth over her boots. But she didn't flinch. "We're not like them," she whispered, as if he could understand. "We're not here to cage you." For hours, they worked. Slowly, they cleared rocks and branches. Jonas managed to wedge a rope beneath one boulder, using the winch to lift it just enough. Ghost stumbled free, collapsing in exhaustion. For a second, Alara thought he might let her touch him, but instinct kicked in. With a desperate cry, he bolted into the rain, disappearing into the mist. Jonas cursed. "We should have let nature handle it." Alara looked out toward the ridge where the stallion vanished. Her clothes were soaked, her hands bleeding, but she only smiled faintly. "No," she said. "He needed to know there's still kindness in this world." Weeks passed. The rescue team moved on to other cases: lost pets, injured wildlife, abandoned horses. But Alara couldn't stop thinking about him. Every night, she replayed that look in his eyes, the fear mixed with confusion, and maybe a spark of recognition. She knew the valley where he might roam now. Every morning, she packed a small bag with apples and oats, driving out to plains. The locals laughed. "You think you can tame Ghost? He doesn't belong to anyone." "I'm not trying to tame him," she said quietly. "I'm trying to reach him." At first, she only saw glimpses, a shadow moving between the pines, hoof prints near the creek. Once, she found his mane caught on a branch, a single strand of silver against the bark. It felt like a message, proof that he was still out there. And then one morning, just as dawn touched the grass, she saw him again, standing on the far side of the field, watching her. Same storm gray coat, Same wary stance. She froze. "Hi," she said softly, smiling despite the tears in her eyes. "Remember me?" The wind carried her voice across the field. Ghost flicked his ears, muscles tensing. She reached into her bag and placed an apple on the ground. Then she backed away slowly, leaving it there. He didn't move. Not at first, but after she stepped back 10 paces, he lowered his head, sniffed the air, and took a cautious step forward. One more, and another. Then, with a trembling snort, he took the apple in his mouth. For Alara, it wasn't victory. It was grace. She came back every day. Sometimes he'd appear, sometimes not. But every time, she left something behind. A piece of fruit, a handful of oats, or just her quiet presence in the valley. The distance between them began to shrink, inch by inch, until one evening, something changed. Ghost approached closer than ever before. The light was soft, gold spilling over the hills. She stood still, heart pounding, as he stopped just a few feet away. His breath hitched. So did hers. She extended her hand, not to grab, not to force, just to offer. He stared at her for what felt like forever. Then, slowly and possibly, he leaned forward. His muzzle brushed her fingers. And in that fleeting moment, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the wild horse trusted a human again. But trust, once given, can be fragile. And in the days that followed, something would test that fragile bond in ways neither of them could have imagined. The bond between Alara and Ghost grew stronger with every sunrise. He would wait at a distance when she arrived, watching, always alert but no longer afraid. His ears would flick toward her voice, and sometimes, on the gentlest mornings, he would walk closer on his own. It wasn't ownership. It was understanding. Alara never brought ropes or bridles. She didn't want to break him. She wanted him to heal. And somehow he seemed to understand that. Days turned into weeks. The valley began to bloom again after the long storm season. Birds returned to the creeks, and the grass grew tall enough to dance in the wind. The world felt alive again, and for the first time in years, so did Ghost. One day, Jonas joined her again. He hadn't seen Ghost since that night in the ravine. When he spotted the stallion grazing a few yards away, he whispered, almost in disbelief, "You actually did it. You earned his trust." Alara smiled faintly. "No," she said. "He chose to give it." Jonas nodded, watching the way Ghost's muscles rippled beneath his coat. "You ever think of bringing him in? Training him, maybe?" "That's not my choice," she said softly. "If he ever follows me willingly, I'll take that as his answer." And so she waited every day. She arrived before dawn, leaving fruit and grain, sometimes humming softly to the rising sun. And every day, Ghost came a little closer, staying a little longer. It was almost peaceful until the hunters came. The first gunshot shattered the morning calm. Ghost reared, eyes wide with terror. Birds burst into the air, the valley echoing with chaos. Alara dropped to her knees, heart pounding. "No, no, no, not again," she cried, scanning the ridgeline. A group of men had appeared near the western slope, rifles slung over their shoulders. They weren't supposed to be here. This was protected land, part of the sanctuary zone. But that had never stopped poachers looking for wild horses to sell. Ghost bolted toward the riverbed. Alara ran after him, shouting, "Go the other way. Please go east." Her voice cracked with desperation, but he didn't understand. He only ran, the old fear burning through him again. Jonas arrived moments later, out of breath. "Alara, hunters! They're circling from the north." She turned, eyes blazing. "We have to get to him before they do." They sprinted through the tall grass, every step sinking into mud. The air reeked of gunpowder. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Ghost stumbled near the edge of the river, one leg nicked by a bullet. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to slow him down. Alara reached him first, sliding to her knees beside him. "It's okay," she gasped, voice trembling. "You're okay." He was trembling, breathing hard. His eyes darted between her and the approaching shadows of men. She stood tall, planting herself between Ghost and hunters. "Put the guns down," she shouted. her voice cutting through the wind. One of the men laughed. "Lady, that's a wild horse. Worth a fortune. Step aside." "He's not yours to take," she said firmly. Jonas appeared beside her, pulling out his phone. "Game warden's on his way," he muttered. But the hunters didn't care. They fanned out, tightening the circle. Illyra could feel Ghost shifting behind her, panic rising again. If he bolted now, they'd shoot. So she did the only thing she could. She turned and met his eyes. "Trust me," she whispered. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ghost hesitated, trembling. Then, as if remembering that first touch, that first moment of peace, he stilled. Illyra stepped closer, slowly placing a hand on his neck. His skin was hot beneath her palm, muscles coiled like wire. "We're leaving," she murmured. "Now." Then she turned and began walking, not running, down the narrow path along the river. Step by step, Ghost followed. The hunters shouted, but their voices blurred in the wind. Jonas stayed behind just long enough to film and call for backup. Within minutes, the sirens echoed across the valley. By the time the wardens arrived, Illyra and Ghost were gone. They found shelter deep within the trees, beside an old ranger cabin long abandoned. There, under a blanket of rain and quiet, Illyra cleaned his wound. Ghost trembled but didn't pull away. The trust held. "You're safe now," she said softly. "I promise." He exhaled long and low, as if finally releasing everything he had carried for years. Over the next few days, the wardens cleared the hunters from the area. The valley was declared off-limits to anyone but rescue personnel. For once, the wild belonged only to the wild. Illyra stayed in the cabin with Ghost until he healed. She would talk to him in the evenings, telling stories about her life, about the animals she had saved, about the ones she couldn't. Sometimes, she swore he listened. His ears would twitch when she laughed. His eyes would soften when she spoke a loss. When he was strong enough, she opened the gate to the clearing. He stood there, free to go. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "You never did." For a long while, Ghost didn't move. Then, slowly, he walked toward her, close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. One last nuzzle, one last goodbye. Then he turned and galloped into the sunrise. Months later, Illyra returned to the valley for a routine patrol. The grass had grown tall again, the rivers were full. And there, standing on the distant ridge, was a familiar silhouette, silver mane glinting in the sun. Ghost watched her for a long time. Then he lifted his head, letting out a soft, echoing whinny that rolled through the hills like a song. Illyra smiled, tears blurring her vision. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. Trust had already bridged the distance. And in that moment, under the endless sky, she knew some connections can never be broken, not by fear, not by time, not by the wild itself. Because sometimes trust isn't about taming what's wild. It's about learning to stand beside it and letting it be free.